we see that a lot of money, $8,560,625, is being sent to America's Turning Point. They are sending it to their own shelter.
You guys, so a week before Charlie lost his life, he expressed some concerns about the finances at Turning Point USA. In fact, he wanted to put together an entire department, a little mini department, to address those concerns, and we have
Interview 0:000:23. The day those leaked emails hit the internet, it felt like someone had cracked open a door that was never meant to move. Everything inside TPUSA suddenly shifted. Voices dropped lower. Hallway conversations stopped mid-sentence. And the people who once carried themselves like they were untouchable started watching the corners of the room a little too carefully, like they expected someone to step out of the shadows with questions they didn't know how to answer. Because buried inside those emails was a number nobody could ignore. 15 million. A number that slid across donation channels, bounced between departments, and reappeared in places that didn't match the public records at all. A number that made staff whisper the kind of things you only say when you think the wrong person might be listening. A number that made the letters I, and S suddenly feel louder than any headline tied to Charlie Kirk's passing. And just like that, people online started connecting dots. Why had Charlie raised concerns about finances only days before he was gone? Why did Erika step into the spotlight so fast, delivering polished speeches before anyone even had time to breathe? And why did the quietest people in the building suddenly start acting like they were waiting for something to fall directly on top of them? By the time reports claimed IRS agents were paying attention, the question wasn't whether TPUSA had a problem. It was who inside the building knew what, and how long they had been hoping nobody would ever look closely enough to notice what was really missing. Interview 308-331. The first sign that something was wrong inside the building wasn't the leaked emails or the rumors about missing money. It was the silence. The kind of silence that doesn't show up during grief or shock, but during fear. People inside TPUSA weren't speaking the way they normally did. They weren't laughing in hallways, they weren't debating new projects, and they definitely weren't discussing Charlie's plans the way they used to. It felt like the organization had slipped into a half shadow, waiting for something none of them wanted to admit out loud. Only a few weeks earlier, Charlie himself had mentioned the financial inconsistencies to those closest to him. He didn't make a scene about it. He didn't accuse anyone. He simply said some numbers weren't lining up and he wanted to create a tiny internal group to double-check the flow of funds, the donation trails, and the channels that had expanded too quickly for anyone to comfortably track. He wasn't suspicious, he was worried. He didn't believe anyone was stealing. He just knew the growth was moving too fast, and fast growth attracts mistakes. Or worse, people who hide mistakes on purpose. But when those leaked emails appeared online, all those...
I'm starting to think that the assassination of Charlie Kirk was something akin to a regicide, right? The assassination of a king to install a new ruler who the king would have never approved of, right? Maybe people around him counseling the king, people who perhaps betrayed him, because there are just too many things that I am finding out that are not adding up.
Soft warnings suddenly felt like pieces of something bigger. The emails didn't describe errors, misprints, or accidental transfers. They described movement, money sliding from one account to another, donation paths that were rerouted with no clear explanation, and the same small group of names appearing again and again on approvals. And one of those names belonged to someone closer to Erika than most people ever realized. At first, nobody wanted to believe what they were reading. People said the emails were out of context, exaggerated, maybe even fake. But within hours, staff members quietly admitted to each other that some of the messages matched conversations they had overheard or meetings they had been pushed out of over the past year. And that's when the rumors began. Gentle whispers at first, then heavier. People asking why those numbers were ever approved in the first place. People wondering why Charlie never mentioned these specific transfers, even though he was usually the first to spot a financial discrepancy. People looking at each other like they were standing on a surface that could crack under their feet at any moment. The strange part wasn't the numbers themselves. Non-profit finances get messy often. The strange part was how prepared Erika seemed the moment the story started spreading. While everyone else looked stunned, unsteady, or overwhelmed by the online chatter, she appeared calm, centered, almost rehearsed. She went live in interviews with polished answers. She smiled when cameras arrived. She spoke confidently about carrying Charlie's legacy forward. There was no hesitation in her voice, no break, no moment where she seemed rattled by anything happening around her. That calmness is what made people start looking harder. Because while she was presenting herself as a grieving widow stepping into leadership out of duty, the timing felt too sharp, too clean. She didn't wait to gather herself. She didn't pause before accepting the spotlight. She didn't seem shaken by the idea that the organization was about to be at the center of a financial storm. It was like she already knew the storm was coming, and she had prepared her umbrella ahead of time. That's when people started rewatching the footage of the phone call. The one where Mikey McCoy, Charlie's chief of staff, made the call that Erika claimed informed her about Charlie's passing. But when viewers looked closer, something felt off. Mikey didn't even know Charlie's exact condition at that moment. He had no confirmation. There was no way Erika could have received the kind of detailed news she later described. And that inconsistency made people rewind everything else she said. If the timeline didn't match there, what else didn't match? Inside the building, the uneasiness grew. Even people who defended Erika at first began to admit quietly that something about the speed, the poise, the control she displayed didn't sit right. At the same time, some of Charlie's closest allies started acting distant, evasive, almost weighed down. They avoided meetings. They stopped responding to messages. They whispered instead of talking. And they looked like people who knew a heavy truth was sitting right behind them, waiting to fall forward. The moment that really shifted the energy came when someone leaked the detail that TPUSA's financial growth didn't match the reported numbers. On paper, everything looked clean. Too clean, like someone had polished the reports until they were spotless. But the public fundraising numbers, old donor statements, and internal logs didn't line up. They rarely do in big organizations, but this time the gaps were wide enough to raise eyebrows in places where eyebrows actually matter. By the time word spread that IRS agents were asking quiet questions, the tension in the halls was thick. People walked like they were stepping over broken glass, trying not to make noise or draw attention. It wasn't fear of the public. It was fear of what those agents might find. Because once the IRS looks at something, they don't look away. And then it happened. According to staff who refused to put their names on record, the first agent stepped through the doors with a folder in hand, and the whole building felt like it stopped breathing. Phones went quiet. Keyboards stopped clicking. Even casual conversations froze. People watched from the corners of their eyes like they were witnessing something they weren't supposed to see. But the most shocking detail wasn't that the IRS arrived. It was how certain individuals reacted the instant they did. Some staff looked confused, disoriented, like they had no idea why investigators were there. Others looked like they expected it. They didn't flinch. They didn't blink. They just tightened their expressions, lowered their eyes, and stepped aside. Those were the same people whose names had appeared repeatedly in the leaked messages. Meanwhile, Erika maintained her calm. She smiled for cameras that day, posted a polished statement online, and moved like nothing around her was cracking. But behind that calm exterior, people inside the building were beginning to question things they never thought they would ask. How long had she known about the inconsistencies? Why did she step into power so fast? And why did the leaked emails make it look like conversations had been happening behind Charlie's back? The more people looked, the more the timeline frayed. Charlie had raised concerns. He wanted a department to check the books. He mentioned numbers moving too cleanly, too quickly. And days later, the entire organization shifted into an era of silence. The connections were unsettling. The unanswered questions were heavier than ever. And the building that once felt loud, confident, full of purpose now felt like a place where everyone was waiting for someone else to speak first. Because someone had moved money. Someone had approved transfers. Someone had shaped the narrative. And if the leaked emails were even partially true, someone close to Erika might have known exactly which threads were about to unravel. That is where everything inside TPUSA stood as the first wave of whispers turned into full conversations. A building holding its breath, an organization trying to look calm, and a widow whose confidence had begun raising more questions than answers. And inside those walls, people were starting to suspect that whatever came next would not be small, not accidental, not forgettable. It would be something that reached back months, maybe years, into a financial trail that was finally being forced into daylight. The strangest part about the days that followed wasn't the noise online. It was the quiet inside TPUSA. People who used to walk confidently suddenly avoided eye contact. Meetings that were normally loud and full of ideas became short, restrained, almost scripted. Everyone was trying to read everyone else, trying to decide who knew something, who was hiding something, and who was pretending they didn't see anything at all. The first whispers came from two staff members who had been there long before Erika stepped into the spotlight. They said they remembered conversations from months earlier that didn't make sense at the time. Side meetings happening behind closed doors. Strange transfers that were explained away with quick excuses. And an increasing number of projects that were suddenly being channeled through new departments nobody fully understood. Back then, people assumed these were part of Charlie's expanding vision. But now that Charlie was gone, those decisions looked different. They looked like steps someone else had been planning long before anyone realized it. The leaked emails only made those old memories more unsettling. One message referenced a transfer of funds to a temporary partner organization. Another mentioned a short-term shell created for internal restructuring. Phrases like that don't usually appear in nonprofits unless someone is trying to move money quietly. Even then, staff still wanted to give the benefit of the doubt. They said maybe these were interim organizations, maybe these were normal administrative decisions, maybe this was nothing. But the numbers didn't match the explanations. And people knew it. The internal financial reports that Charlie asked to be reviewed showed one version of TPUSA's growth. The public reports showed a different version. And the leaked emails revealed a third version entirely. When three different stories appear in the same organization, someone is rewriting the narrative. That's not an accident. That's intent. What rattled everyone more was the timing. Every questionable transfer people could trace seemed to happen around moments when Charlie was distracted, traveling, or busy dealing with crises unrelated to finances. And every time he tried to focus on the books, something else pulled him away. Staff didn't think much of it back then. Leaders are busy. Directors often get swamped with work. But now, looking back, some started wondering whether those moments were random or strategic. One employee said Charlie had been unusually troubled the week before he passed. Not panicked, but quietly frustrated. He mentioned numbers that didn't make sense and said he felt like the organization was growing in ways he didn't fully understand. He didn't accuse anyone. He didn't name names. But he wanted oversight. He wanted clarity. And most importantly, he wanted people he trusted to go through the accounts line by line. And the moment those words left his mouth, everything changed. Because within days, Charlie was gone. The public focused on his passing, the tributes, the emotional outpouring. Inside the building, people were still processing it too. But something about the timing gnawed at them. Especially when Erika stepped into the center immediately, guiding the narrative, giving interviews, and shaping the storyline with a level of confidence that felt too prepared for someone who just lost her husband under unexpected circumstances. The calm she displayed made even her closest supporters shift uncomfortably. If the organization was being pulled into a financial controversy, why wasn't she more shaken? If the numbers were legitimate, why didn't she welcome the investigation with open arms? And if she had nothing to hide, why did she sidestep every question about the timing of those transfers connected to her circle? People inside the building began questioning something they never had before. How much did Erika actually know? Not in a conspiratorial sense. Not in a dark, dramatic way. But in a quiet, logical, uncomfortable one. If the leaked emails were real, someone had been involved in financial decisions long before Charlie passed. Someone who wasn't part of his inner financial team. Someone connected to the sudden projects, the new shell organizations, the partner groups that didn't exist on paper until money moved through them. The reason the suspicion grew wasn't because Erika was managing the aftermath. It was because she seemed too prepared for it. While most of TPUSA was reeling from the emotional shock, she was stepping forward with polished statements and shaping the public narrative in ways that looked more like a strategic rollout than a widow processing grief. Even the words she used felt rehearsed, as if she had been thinking about them long before the cameras turned on. That's when staff remembered the comment she kept repeating, "This is what Charlie would have wanted." But the people who actually worked closely with him disagreed quietly. They said Charlie hated rushed decisions. He avoided spotlight moments that felt overly theatrical. And he definitely wouldn't have wanted his financial concerns swept under emotional messaging. They said if Charlie were here, he would be asking hard questions, not defending a polished image. This is where the fear really set in. Because when the IRS arrived, they didn't move like they were unsure about why they were there. They moved with purpose. They asked for specific folders. They requested certain names. They knew which accounts needed reviewing. That isn't random. When investigators walk in already knowing where to look, it means someone has been feeding them information for a long time. Or someone inside the organization triggered the red flags themselves without realizing how loud those flags would look to federalize. This raised a new set of questions among staff. Who tipped them off? Who had seen enough to start whispering outside the building? And why were certain people inside TPUSA acting like they already knew the investigation was coming? In the days that followed, something else happened that pushed suspicion even further. Donors who had supported TPUSA for years suddenly started pulling back. They weren't expressing anger. They weren't making public statements. They were simply distancing themselves quietly, like they didn't want to be associated with whatever was brewing behind closed doors. These were donors who used to defend TPUSA fiercely, people who attended every event, who trusted Charlie completely. And now they were stepping away without explanation. That kind of shift doesn't happen without a reason. Even more unsettling was the way a few long-term staff members, people who had once been proud of their work, began avoiding their own projects. They stopped taking the lead. They declined interviews. They refused to comment publicly. They looked like people who had seen something they wished they hadn't, like they were waiting for the ground beneath them to shift in a direction they couldn't predict. At the same time, Erika's public appearances grew more polished. She spoke with conviction, with poise, with unwavering confidence. She presented herself as the one carrying Charlie's legacy forward. She framed every statement around him, around his mission, around what she believed he would have wanted. But the more she spoke, the more people noticed what she didn't say. She didn't mention the financial discrepancies. She didn't acknowledge the leaked emails. She didn't address the IRS questions. And she didn't explain the inconsistencies in her own timeline. Instead, she stayed focused on carefully crafted messages, polished images, and emotional appeals. It was a strategy that worked for the public, but inside the building, people were seeing something different. They were seeing someone who looked like she was controlling a narrative, not reacting to it. Someone who needed the spotlight to stay exactly where she placed it. Someone who didn't want attention drifting toward the unanswered questions that had started echoing through TPUSA's empty hallways. By the end of the second week, staff were describing the atmosphere as suffocating. Everyone was on edge. Conversations ended abruptly whenever someone unexpected walked by. And the people who once would have defended Erika with their entire careers started looking unsure, like they didn't know which version of the story they believed anymore. And deep inside the building, the same question kept resurfacing. If Charlie had lived long enough to see what those leaked emails revealed, what would he have done? And more importantly, who inside the organization was afraid of the answer? That question hung in the air, getting heavier each day, while investigators quietly dug deeper into accounts, transfers, and approval chains that nobody wanted to explain. And for the first time, people began to wonder if the missing money was only the beginning of a much larger truth waiting to break open. The moment investigators began connecting dates, something subtle shifted inside TPUSA. People who had been confidently walking the halls now moved like they were stepping through fog, unsure of what lay ahead. And even though the office lights stayed bright, the building itself felt darker, quieter, like everything inside had started bending beneath the weight of secrets nobody wanted to acknowledge. What rattled people most wasn't the idea of wrongdoing. It was the idea that the truth might be far more complicated than a simple case of missing funds. Every few hours, someone whispered a new detail, a timeline that didn't match, a meeting that suddenly made sense in hindsight, a conversation they overheard months ago but didn't know how to interpret at the time. All those little memory weeks before, meetings that were never mentioned in public, conversations that didn't match the story she continued to repeat no matter how many times she was asked. People began whispering again, but this time the whispers carried a different tone. It wasn't only fear now. It was realization. realization that something they had taken for granted might not have been true at all. People who had defended Erika started looking at each other with expressions that said they were starting to rethink everything they believed. The emotional strain inside the building grew heavier. People didn't sleep well. They started avoiding their own offices, gathering quietly in corners where they felt unseen. It wasn't just about the missing money anymore. It was about truth, about betrayal, about whether Charlie's concerns in his final days were more than random worries, whether he sensed something far bigger unraveling beneath the surface. One staff member finally admitted a detail they had avoided acknowledging for months. They said Charlie looked defeated during his last conversation about the finances. Not angry, not overwhelmed, just tired. He said he felt like something around him wasn't adding up, and that every time he tried to get close to the truth, another distraction appeared, pulling him away. Back then they assumed he was stressed. Now they wondered if he had been pushed in those directions intentionally. That's when people inside the building started referring to a phrase Charlie used only once in a private meeting with two trusted colleagues. They said he mentioned feeling boxed in, like decisions were being made around him without his knowledge. The phrase sounded harmless at the time, but in the middle of an investigation about missing funds and hidden channels, boxing suddenly felt like a warning nobody recognized until it was too late. Meanwhile, Erika's public appearances took on a colder tone. She stopped addressing rumors entirely. She avoided questions about timelines. She repeated statements that felt more scripted with every interview. She framed everything around legacy, pain, and responsibility, but she never acknowledged the internal concerns that had now become impossible to ignore. The more she avoided those questions, the more people doubted her narrative. Her calm now looked less like strength and more like a shield. And each polished statement created a sharper contrast with the confusion, fear, and uncertainty spreading inside TPUSA's walls. The real turning point arrived when investigators requested access to a set of older emails that almost no one remembered existed. They were archived messages, tucked away in a system that wasn't easy to reach. When the team pulled them up, the room fell silent. The emails revealed early discussions about alternative financial structures, backup organizations, and temporary donation channels, all referenced in vague language, but referenced nonetheless. The most alarming detail wasn't the content itself. It was the date. Those messages were exchanged at a time when Charlie was publicly speaking about expanding the organization, but internally was pushing for transparency and accountability. And the messages were not addressed to him. They were circulated among a small group of individuals who had positioned themselves quietly around him, close enough to appear loyal, but distant enough to avoid full scrutiny. And Erika's name appeared in the CC line of one of the threads. The silence in the room when the detail was discovered was so heavy it felt like it pressed against the walls. No one said anything. No one moved. Because that single line changed everything. It didn't prove wrongdoing. It didn't prove involvement. But it proved awareness. Awareness that she had denied again and again. Awareness that shattered her timeline. Awareness that raised more questions than answers. As investigators continued cross-checking the messages, another unsettling truth surfaced. Someone within the organization had known about the financial inconsistencies long before the emails leaked. Someone had tried to raise concerns quietly but was pushed aside, transferred departments, and eventually let go. That person came forward anonymously, saying they had been told certain channels weren't their concern and that questioning them would disrupt the flow of operations. Their testimony aligned with the leaked emails, and when investigators reviewed the former employees' logs, it became clear that they had been right to speak up, and someone else had been determined to silence them. The weight of that realization sent ripples through the staff. Everything they believed about the organization's unity cracked. The idea that everyone had been working toward the same mission no longer felt true. Instead, it looked like multiple missions had been running side by side, some in full view, others just beneath the surface. And the one person who stood at the crossroads of both worlds was Erika. As the investigation spiraled further, another wave of revelations hit the building. Donors began quietly sharing concerns they had never voiced publicly. Some said they were contacted by individuals outside the official fundraising team. Others said they received requests to route donations through alternative organizations that were described as temporary support partners. A few admitted they felt pressured to comply. Those alternative routes appeared in the same leaked emails. Identical language, identical accounts, identical timing. By now, the people inside TPUSA weren't just shocked, they were afraid of what the final picture might look like. Because all these pieces, scattered across different timelines, started converging into one story. A story about planning, about preparation, about an organization expanding so rapidly that its shadows became almost impossible to see through. And through all of this, Erika continued presenting the same steady, composed image. She never faltered. She never broke. She acted like she had anticipated every twist before it arrived. That level of certainty unnerved people more than the investigation itself. Because when someone stands that confidently while the walls around them shift, people can't help wondering why they aren't shaking like everyone else. As the final week of the initial review closed in, investigators prepared their preliminary report. Nobody inside the building knew what it contained, but staff could feel the tension tightening with every hour. People spoke in half sentences. They avoided eye contact. Some even packed personal belongings, just in case the next phase of the investigation pointed fingers they never expected. And then the final whisper spread across the building like a shockwave. Investigators were reportedly preparing to call in multiple names for questioning. Not small names, not distant names, names in leadership, names tied to financial decisions, names that had been in the leaked emails. And one of them, according to several sources, belonged to Erika. The reaction inside TPUSA was immediate. People froze mid-step. Conversations died instantly. And the silence that followed was heavier than any moment since the investigation began. Because if Erika was being called in, it meant the investigators had found something substantial, something that made her timeline, her denials, and her calm facade impossible to maintain without answers. And as the staff stood quietly in the halls, waiting for whatever came next, a single realization settled in with chilling clarity. The story wasn't closing. It was just beginning. If you're still here, then you already know this story is far from over. Every day, new whispers slip out, new details surface, and new questions rise that nobody inside TPUSA seems prepared to answer. The investigation isn't slowing down. The timelines aren't matching up, and the names being mentioned behind closed doors are getting louder, not quieter. So as this situation keeps unfolding, we're going to stay on top of every update and every shift in this story. Make sure you like this video, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter, because things are moving fast and the truth has a way of breaking through when people least expect it. Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell me what you think is really happening behind the scenes. And until the next one, stay locked in.